What do Falcons do? We rise up. Welcome to RiseUpReactions, the show where we talk all things Falcons, NFL, Georgia sports, and in general, the sports news of the day. I'm your host, Dr. Lee Denning, the Golden Hard Doc, and a lifelong sports fan. And I'm coming back to you with a fan's reaction to the Falcons draft for 2024. I have already given my reaction to the Michael Penix Jr. pick. I'm still disgusted by it as a Falcons fan. This is a guy who is going to be probably, if all things go exactly like they're supposed to, he will be starting for his first full season in the NFL at minimum at age 26 and a half and more likely age 27 and a half. And at that point, we have to make a decision already as to whether we want to give him a fifth-year option or not. So we're basically, if all goes well, not going to have an option to even evaluate this guy because of how much money we owe Kirk Cousins. One of the dumbest things we've ever done if you're talking about being all in on Kirk Cousins and then coming back and taking Penix, number 8 overall, my fifth best quarterback in the draft. So it is what it is. I don't want to talk a lot about that one. Let's talk about the rest of the picks. So what did the Falcons do in the second round? We had picked 43, but we traded up to pick 35 with the Arizona Cardinals. And there was a guy still on the board that we desperately needed. We have a few good corners, or at least we have one really good corner and a few guys that one could be really good and the other two are serviceable, but we don't have much depth after that. And we could have taken Cooper DeJean because he was still on the board, a guy who probably should have gone in the top 15 if defense was valued this year. Obviously, 14 picks went straight offense in the draft to start out the draft this year, so everybody was looking more for offense, and then you ended up with a few more defensive guys towards the tail end because all those teams are already pretty good on offense. But instead of taking him, we go with a defensive interior, not even an edge rusher, which we still desperately needed. We address that later, but we go with Root Orororo. There are way too many R's in that name. I hope this guy plays great for us. Clemson defensive interior. I haven't gotten a chance to watch any of them yet, but I don't really understand the pick, or it didn't at the time. I've had a chance to look more at our salary cap, and we ended up taking 2 more defensive interiors in this draft. And what this tells me is that we are making plans for not necessarily this year, but for 2026. Because next year, Taquan Graham falls off in terms of contract. We don't have him on a rookie deal anymore. So if we want to keep him, we're going to have to pay him. And he's a backup. So I don't think we're going to keep him. I think this is definitely a death sentence to Taquan Graham, or at least his time in NFL. I do think this also means that we are planning inevitably for 2026 when David Onyemata's contract expires and when Grady Jarrett's contract expires to move on from both of those guys, both or at least one of those guys when it gets time. Grady Jarrett, heart and soul of our defense. Want to see him do really well. Always want to see him do really well. But he is going to be 33 at the time of his contract expiration. So it would make sense to move on from him at that point in time, let him retire, hopefully, as a Falcon. He could have a little bit more left in the tank. But the average age for a defensive tackle retiring is around 30. So he's already past that mark. He's a little injury-riddled, so he's a guy that I could see us moving on from. But I think it does, the way this draft played out, it spells the end of an era for Grady Jarrett, David Onyemata, and Taquan Graham if we don't win now. So these are guys that we need to win with now. We come back around in the third round. We take Braylon Trice, who, again, I think is an underrated edge rusher. He's a little, he's decently sized. 6'4", 274 pounds. He's had great years in Washington the last 2 years. My question is, how good are the opponents that he's actually played? When you look at how he did against USC because Caleb Williams, it's hard to get to Caleb Williams because he had really good protection, but he only had a 62.4 grade against the offensive line for the Southern California Trojans. And then the other team that he played that had some decent talent on it was Oregon, 64.6, and then he played Michigan, 66.9. So not the best showings, not the worst showings. He's a guy that had 8 sacks, 9 sacks, and 2 sacks in the last 3 years, going backwards from there. So he's done a lot better the last 2 years. If he can be a 6 or 7 sack guy in Atlanta, he is well worth a third-round pick. But the problem I have is that we had a chance to get somebody like Latu. We had a chance for Dallas Turner. Obviously, there was a trade-back partner to try and get a quarterback, and we had an opportunity to potentially do that and pick up another day 2 or an early day 3 pick to maybe bolster the roster a little bit. We didn't do it. We did give up one of our third-round picks, though, in order to draft Ororo. And that ended up causing us to not draft again or not pick again until the 4th round, where we had a couple of picks here. We ended up with pick 109. We took Brandon Doros, another defensive interior, actually rated higher by PFF than Ruka Ororo. And again, Oregon tackle. He's been consistent throughout his career. He's not a big sack guy, but he is a 290, 6'3" guy who should be decent for us. And again, he's going to start off as a depth piece and move on from there. We'll see what ends up happening with him. We come back beginning of the 5th round. I said we had 2 4s. Sorry, it was 4th, and then we got a 5th round pick. J.D. Bertrand doesn't hurt to have inside linebacker depth, but I just wonder where he's going to be because you have Nate Landman, you have Nate Landman, you have Troy Anderson, and you have Caden Ellis, all of which are interior linemen. We're only going to be running with 2 of them at any given time for the most part. So I don't know where he's going to fit in, but he had a really good year with Notre Dame this last year. He's been kind of a middle-of-the-road player otherwise. Again, not really a sack guy, but he has, 41 tackles this past year. He looks like he's kind of a hybrid coverage guy. I don't know much about him. I don't watch Notre Dame football because I think they are the most overrated team in all of the freaking collegiate world. But we did come back and have 3 depth piece 6th round picks. I'll start with the last one with Zion Logue just because we're going with the theme of defensive interior. I don't know that Logue can be a starter in the NFL. Having watched him at Georgia, he was one of the lesser guys in terms of defensive talent for Georgia. Certainly a guy who could be coached up and could be a rotational piece. I don't see him being a consistent starter, but definitely he could serve that Taquan Graham role as a backup. He's probably going to be on the practice squad this year just because of how many guys we're going to roll with. I see him making the squad at some point due to injury because it inevitably happens on the defensive interior that people get hurt. So we could have another injury to Grady Jarrett. David Onyemata missed a little bit of time last year. Taquan Graham even missed a little bit of time last year. And he missed significant time the year before last. So, you could see him play here. The other 2 guys are offensive picks that are both going to be complete and total depth picks. There are a lot of people that are really questioning the first pick with Jace McClellan, the lead back from Alabama, taken 186 overall in the 6th round. This is what I'll say about running backs. It's good to stay young, it's good to stay healthy because these guys are going to consistently get hurt in the NFL. McClellan is a solid overall running back. He is going to be a depth piece. He could be a special teams guy to start with. He had some really, really good games. Missed the Georgia game, so I really can't compare him to how Georgia did. But he had a good game against Michigan. He's had great games against teams like Ole Miss that had decent teams. The team that he didn't do great against was Texas this year. That's probably the worst game that he had. But again, Alabama was not the Alabama that we saw towards the end of the season there. But Jace McClellan, solid backup piece. He will be fighting for the RB3 spot on the roster. And yes, we will be rolling with 3 running backs because it's just absolutely asinine and stupid to only have 2 starting running backs on your entire 53-man roster because inevitably people are going to get hurt. But John Robinson missed a little bit of time last year. Tyler Algier was not the healthiest last year. He had a couple of times where he was not just good to go, though he has been healthier significantly, or pretty significantly in his career so far, 2 years. You have Avery Williams on our depth chart, who we don't know his health status. He missed all of last year. And you got Carlos Washington Jr., who I like. He made our practice squad last year, beating out, I don't remember who he beat out, but he did look electric in preseason. But so we have possibly 5 backs so far going into training camp, going into the preseason. We'll see who makes the cut. But yeah, Jason McClellan, it's not going to hurt. It's not going to help. But you expect guys in the 6th round to be depth pieces. And then we needed a wide receiver in this draft. We ended up taking Casey Washington, who's one of the back end guys. The only thing I can really say about him as an Illinois Fighting Illini, just looking at his stats, he's 6'2", 200 pounds. I don't have a lot to say about him. What I'll say is this. What I've read about him, he does not drop the ball. He had 3 drops on like 83 catchable passes last year. So he doesn't drop the ball a ton. So he's probably going to end up being a special teamer. Could end up being a potential rotational guy as the wide receiver 5 potentially for this team. It just really depends. We've got pretty solid on 3 wide receivers plus a tight end that's going to be in the mix here. So, I don't know. I really think that he's just going to be sitting on the bench or sitting on the practice squad. But that's all I got for you. It takes a couple of years to really have an idea of where the draft stands. But I'm underwhelmed because of how bad the first-round pick was. And I am going to call it bad. I hope every one of these players succeeds. They are all Falcons now, and I want success for all of them. I hope Penix comes out and is the left-handed Patrick Mahomes when he gets his chance. Nothing would make me happier than for that to be the case. But for what we need right now, for where the team is at, he was not what we needed. We needed a Latu. We needed a Turner. We needed a corner, a Cooper DeJean. We needed a bunch of things. This was a draft that feels like we were not making any picks whatsoever for the now. We were making them all for the future. I don't know that that's the worst thing in the world. Maybe we'll look back on this draft and say, hey, thank God that we had some of these guys on defensive interior because we did need to have some guys on cheap deals. Maybe we'll look back at that, but this feels like a reload the defense draft, not necessarily a get a bunch of starters draft, but a reload for the future on the defense. And I don't know that any of the guys, other than potentially Trice, are going to be day one starters. If Grady Jarrett is hurt, Ruka Rororo might be a day one starter, but hell, Brandon Dorlus is ranked higher than him, and we got him later. He might beat out Rororo, even though we traded up for the guy. So, I don't know. I'm disappointed as a Falcons fan. There was a lot of hype going into this draft. I hope this is the last time that we pick 8 or worse the rest of the time for at least another 5 or 6 years. I hope we go on a streak of winning. We have not sniffed the playoffs since we actually made the new stadium. We haven't hosted a playoff game in our own home stadium. It would be nice. We'll see if we can actually do it this year, but that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching, liking, sharing, and subscribing. My pain is your gain, and as always, rise up.